If the UN didn't exist, we'll have all the reasons to create one. You see, let's just step back and look at 1945, at the end of the Second World War. We wanted to create a new world order. This new world order, which of course was different from the time of the League of Nations, which proved to be very ineffective in terms of doing what was really crucial, which is preventing war. For the last 81 years, we can certainly say, with a lot of uncertainty and without any fear of contradiction, that the UN has succeeded in preventing a third world war. What does this mean? What does this mean? You look at the opening words on the United Nations Charter. It says, we, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save the succeeding generation from the scourge of conflict. This is what the UN was built to do. Now, many people, of course, you know, they look at the United Nations, the failures, Rwanda, Somalia, Bosnia, Kosovo, and make conclusions. Oh, this organization is rubbish. Absolutely not. For me, I look at it from the point of view of what the founding document of the Charter, in the Charter, what it says. That is a living document. By the way, the Charter is one of the most difficult documents to amend. That's how difficult it is. So that this organization, we've had it, I don't know how many times we have changed our constitution, which is about 30 years. The UN Charter has been changed only 3 times since 1945. Well, I'm not saying that it cannot, Alan, I'm not saying that it cannot be changed, but it's very hard to be changed.
That makes it a problem.
Even in the context, by the way, even in the context of constitutions, there are flexible constitutions, there are rigid constitutions. The American Constitution has been changed about 25 times since 1776. That's how difficult it is, because you have to make, the covenant that you make, the 10 Commandments, even those of you who, the Embides who go to church every Sunday, they will tell you that the 10 Commandments, the way they were handed down to that's how they still are. So my point simply here is this, that this organization, we may condemn it because of the failure that we see, but it does more than, and especially in the context of issues of peace and security. Even if it was to concentrate only on peace and security, I had the chance, and this is the beauty with the, Professor Sally and I attended the same course. We did the same course. And we were taught by the same professor, Professor Pincho. And we used to have a paper called 3.3, United Nations. So, United Nations. So, I know what I'm talking about. I can tell you this. So even if we concentrated only on peace and security, what the UN has been able to do from 1945 to date, so many peace support operations, peacekeeping operations, issues to do with the human rights, adding human rights, all this. Of course, it's academic, of course, for everyday person. I think this is where Alan is heading. For the everyday person, if you say the United Nations has succeeded somewhere, they say, oh, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Rwanda, yeah, this is, I agree. I absolutely agree with you. I
don't understand.
But also, we also need to understand this. And again, as I tell my students, that the UN was designed to deal with interstate problems. The whole thing, this whole structure is designed for interstate problems, not intrastate problems.
So what is it doing? What is MONUSCO doing?
Now, exactly, okay, I'll come to that. Now, because of the fact that we do not have an alternative, that's why we have MONUSCO in Congo. That's why we have MINUSMA in Mali. That's why we have MINUSCA in Central African Republic, because we do not have an alternative. You tell me, even the Congo, which Alan you are talking about, Congo's problem started when? They started as Congo when it was founded as a Congo Free State. Congo is the only country in the world which I know was founded as a personal estate of a king, somewhere in Belgium. Personal estate. This person decided to exploit Congo. When he left, it is the Belgian state which took over. By the time, if you look at the statistics, by the time Congo got independent in 1960, there are only 5 doctors, 2 engineers, And it had been colonized for over 70 years. Now we can condemn every African country. Now Congo in 1960 implodes. That's why we have Katanga, we have all this. So again, we can go into the history of this. So what do? The first mission which the United Nations does, Alan, is 1960, ONUC. ONUC is patchwork because fundamentally the state, you know, the late John Garang used to say, when he would talk about Sudan, they will ask him, say, this, we need to have a new agenda for Sudan. And he would say, it is so deformed to be reformed. Now, Congo, we need to understand it. This is something which was deformed from the word go as a state. So how do you reform this kind of thing? So it's been patchwork since 1960. Patchwork, why? Because of the way it was founded. Now, calling in MONUSCO, calling in the United Nations is also an acknowledgement that we do have a fundamental problem with this thing. But can we say the United Nations succeeded in Congo? Certainly not. Just like you could also say the UN has not succeeded. I agree, whether it is Central African Republic, whether it is Mali, whether it is Kosovo, whether it is Sudan, whether it is South Sudan, we can talk about all these missions. But the fact of the matter simply, Alan, is this, and my point simply is that this is what we have. The multilateral system is expressed through the United Nations.
Okay,
Professor,
yes.
With due respect, I think first of all, the United Nations is not sacrosanct, and it must be interrogated. And we must have an honest conversation about its abilities. It was created in 1945, at a time when the world was recovering from a war. This is 2026. And the United Nations still can't decide whether or not to allow 1.5 billion Africans to have a say on the Security Council. We look at the United Nations and its current...
Sorry, Alan.
I know.
The United Nations is not a human being.
No,
at the end of the day...
Professor, allow me, please. Allow me to land this point that I'm about to lose. I think, in my view, first of all, I've associated myself with the United Nations. I don't have the bona fides of claiming that I studied the same 3.3, but I have worked at the United Nations. I have been part of a journalist corps at the United Nations. I have studied it in law. And in my view, as the president said once, when you go to the United Nations in New York, as I have been many times, you think that it's a collection of Africans because you have all these African countries represented by individuals. But and whereas you can argue that sovereignty is important, we must come back home and rethink whether we are really wanted in these spaces. 2006, we are promised that we are going to have a seat at the United Nations. Everybody who comes up says we are going to reform it. But the dysfunction does not allow the reform that is required for Africa to have a voice. So my point is, how about we default to our regional blocks and strengthen those and have a functional East African community and have a very coherent and effective African Union that can then push for Africa's position more in a much more united, because we do need the United Nations and to associate with the world because of human development and all these other benefits. But we have to default to who we truly are as Africans and say that we as Africans need a strong African Union, and also we need a strong East African community, because that is where we truly have impact, influence, and can determine our own issues. But if you're going to continue begging,
just a minute.
If you're going to continue begging for a seat at someone else's table, which was set up without our involvement, that is problematic.
I think, Alan, you have I'm sorry to associate myself with your sentiments. Number one, let's not assume that the UN is a human being. At the end of the day, the UN is an intergovernmental organization.
Made up of human beings.
It is member states. The way the UN operates, the way the strength of the United Nations is what the member states allow it to be. So in other words, it's the member states at the end of the day who we default to. Now, the second point that we are trying to make, on the point of interrogating what the UN is or is not. First of all, you go back to the basics. Is there something called the UN? In fact, if we were the one, if we go back to the basics and we will ask, is there a UN really? Because this is an organization which was set up by basically two people. President President Roosevelt, and Prime Minister Winston Churchill. In fact, the name United Nations was, as the two men sat in 1944, as they sat in the White House, debating on what this new organization should be called to succeed the League of Nations. It is Eleanor Roosevelt who burst out of the kitchen and said, gentlemen, if you are looking for a name, why don't you call it United Nations? In fact, I normally tell my students that if it was patenting, that thing named Eleanor Roosevelt should be receiving the money of the name of the United Nations. Now, just lastly, Timothy, I think the point which Alan is raising, which is very important, and again he takes us back to the debate of the early 1960s or late 1950s, where there was this debate whether Africa should have unity, or it should be, we strengthen the regions, and this debate of the Casablanca group, Monrovia group. This is exactly what Alan is alluding to. Do we strengthen our regional economic communities? The answer is yes. East African communities, SADC, ECOWAS. But the point simply is that we need also, it is complementary. It's a building block. These regional economic communities.
Africa speaks together is how Dr. Tedros becomes Director General of the WHO.
Nobody became Director General, even his own government never nominated him.
Africa speaking
Professor
together.
and Alan, let me come back to you. Let me get Professor Banyua and Honorable Bidde.
I think this is interesting because my colleagues fail to appreciate the fact that the United Nations belongs to the P5. They decide what happens. And
You've thrown a new spanner in the works.
yeah, I mean, if there is a war today in the Middle East and the UN has no role in it, what are we talking about? Because one of the P5s is in it. So yes, we have been accepted to be part of it so that we can be governed in it. And it's similar to the trade, to the business aspect of the United Nations, that we have signed an agreement with the European Union, with America, never to export processed coffee, and many other things. Now, when Africa tries to come together, when East Africa tries to come together, one of the P5 will come and lecture to you and say, don't be part of that. And that's it. So, if you are able to gain the economic muscle like China has done, like India has done, then you may be admitted to the P5.
Absolutely.
But before you gain that muscle, I mean, the rules are there to govern you, not to mess up, and if you mess up, they'll whip you. Otherwise, for them, they do what they wish.
Africa is a